Hello, and welcome to This is Cohousing, the Cohousing podcast. I'm Charles Durrett, author and principal architect at the Cohousing Company. In this episode, we're discussing getting your cohousing community approved in your county or city. Many groups have been, in my opinion, overly cautious and overly concerned about the entitlement process. I don't blame them, but the tenacity that our guest Marty Maskall brought to the table that got the project built. She had in many ways project managed a project into existence, and it was a great thing to behold. She's been living there for almost 6 years. Hey, welcome, Marty.
Thanks, Chuck.
I just love it when somebody shows tenacity, fortitude, and simply knows that they're doing the right thing. I just want to take my hat off to watching you because you were like a puppy with a sock. I feel like it's always dangerous to have somebody who's going to live in the project, be the project manager, but you did it and you did it with grace. Are you glad?
Glad I did it? Yes, I am.
Okay.
Because when I look back on my life and the things that I've done that have value, this one is way up there.
Do you have any big life lessons from that experience?
If you think something is worth doing, then just be prepared for the obstacles.
So often people get intimidated. And, what they don't realize is that nobody does it by themselves. It takes one person to initiate a co-housing community, and it takes one person sometimes to just find the site. But in the end of the day, there are a great deal of allies and colleagues in the course of creating a project. For example, when we started a project up in Spokane, 350 people came to the public presentation. That group then, in a very rural town for the most part, had immense number of people that were ready to roll up their sleeves and make a project happen. And you had a lot of various allies of consequence and a lot of committees.
I mean, you have to have the marketing committee. We still have the marketing committee. And I think what's really important is if you see something that you want that you think is important, just start taking steps in that direction. And you don't have to know everything you're going to do. You have to have a willingness to take that first step.
Well, that's also important because there was this woman on the phone the other day who was planning a new project in the great state of Washington, and she kept saying, I need to know what the whole thing looks like.
You're not going to know that.
You're going to have to make adjustments that are smart. It's one foot in front of the other. The wisdom compounds, the strategy compounds, the politics and the familiarity with each other compounds, the trust compounds. And before you know it, you're on a roll. But the first part, you're not on a roll. You're on a little bit of a sludge. And if you're waiting for it to be easy at the onset, you'll be waiting forever.
It's true.
Yeah.
Well,
Um,
take that first step.
Starting with Folsom Co-housing that did not get approved, tell us why not.
Neighbors,
Neighbors, right?
neighbors' lack of political courage on the part of office holders.
We'll talk about the neighbors. Neighbors sometimes feel like, well, who is this coming to our neighborhood? Once they realize that we're looking at a high functioning neighborhood, everybody theoretically wants a high functioning neighborhood in their town. The interesting thing to me is how many folks think that they already live in a high functioning neighborhood. And I'm not passing judgment on it, but one story on Magnolia Street, one woman said, oh, we already have this strong neighborhood. And I said, oh, I would like you to meet Sam, who she had never met. Sam lived right across the street, and they both lived there about 20 years. So people have a funny attitude towards their town, and they're very chauvinistic. But it's not just about being chauvinistic. It's about, I think it was Latzow who said, nobody fears anything more than change. And the fact that change it's the only constant. I think that was Confucius who said that. Change is the only constant. And so those two are dichotomies of each other to the point that they're fighting against each other. They're just a part of the reality of having an influence in anybody's neighborhood. I've learned that you have to help them a lot, especially bureaucrats who worry about getting those phone calls from those neighbors. It's odd that neighbors hold so much sway.
And if at all possible, don't try to get a zoning change because if you have to get a zoning change, that makes it even harder. At our first community meeting, it was called Community Planning Advisory Committee, we had 100 people show up in opposition to our project. We maybe had 20 people in our group, but 100 opposed. And there were still people that voted for it, but it just wasn't meant to be. And we eventually moved on to the next one.
These days, I'm helping a lot of groups get a site, and only 50% of the time are they zoned correctly, largely because the sites that are not zoned correctly are simply cheaper. Co-housing groups actually have a very stellar track record in getting zoning changes. I don't blame you for wanting to look for a site that has the correct zoning, but you have to have the money to do that because you're competing with every other developer. However, I will say that in Grass Valley, where we had to do a major zone change, 100% commercial to 100% residential, that only worked because the group was very tenacious at the 3 cups of tea side of it. Every neighbor that was planning to live there had at least 3 cups of tea with a neighbor who was opposing the project. And at the first hearing, we had 19 people stand up at the podium and say, "Over my dead body." And at the last hearing, we had one person who stood up and said, "Well, I still think you should worry about the parking. And I don't know why anybody would want to live this way, but these are sure some great people." So the whole great people side of it has to be communicated very well.
3 cups of tea is a great idea. We didn't actually do that, but we did try to talk to the neighbors as much as possible. But we just gave up on Orangevale because there was just too much opposition. So then we went to Folsom and we thought, "Oh, this'll be better." It wasn't. And we had another hearing with all kinds of people in opposition. And when, of course, money and time is expended in these processes. But then we found another lot, which was actually closer to my home, so I liked that, and it turned out that it did not need a zoning change, and that's where we are now. And there were a few people who came and opposed our project, but there weren't very many of them, and the local Community Planning Advisory Commission wasn't persuaded by them. The majority voted for it, which allowed us to go forward to the county and get final approval, and the county loved our project. I mean, if we're supposed to be fighting urban sprawl, it means that we have to build in some of these open lots, and one of the neighbors said to me, "Oh, I like having it open." I said, "Well, you can buy it." And she said, "I can't do that." So everybody wants all this open space, but nobody wants to pay for it. And they fight you if you try to develop something. And that's probably still the case.
It's still the case, except I've been astounded by how much easier it is to get projects approved. And the only project we had been disapproved on previous to your projects was in Marin County, and the last project there went through 5-0 at Planning Commission and 5-0 at the design
Wow,
review,
that's wonderful.
and one hearing each. And that is largely because people now recognize where we are in the housing crisis. We think the bureaucrats are going to, castrate us left and right, and they're really not going to unless you let them, unless you negotiate against yourself. I was planning a homeless project in Eugene, Oregon, and we were starting with 250 tents, 300 people that were already established in a park. And when I wasn't getting the cooperation that I wanted with the city, I started to float the idea that we're going to have to walk on Salem. We're going to walk to Salem, which was 100 miles, the capital, which is 100 miles north of Eugene. And it was so interesting to me when we floated the specter of hundreds of homeless people walking to Salem and all their allies, which is hundreds more. Um, they all of a sudden, the city became very cooperative because that would have been a major news story.
And they didn't want that.
They did not want that, and I think citizens often discount their power,
Right.
and especially when you're talking about homeless people, You would have had all these support vehicles with lunches and dinners and all that stuff, and it would have been a specter of consequence. And the politicians just didn't want it and found ways to cooperate in a hurry.
Yeah.
And the same thing is true of co-housing over and over again. You guys have the power. You have the secret ingredient, which is yourselves.
Right.
You know, it's very easy to say, I used to work in Sacramento a great deal, and it's very easy to say no to a developer with his white boots and white belt and their architect with their black shirt and their black pants. It's very easy for bureaucrats to say no to professionals, but it's very hard for them to say no to their second grade teacher, their favorite librarian, and others who are actually an obvious salt of the earth in the neighborhood. Very hard. But I think you're right. Over and over again, I found myself rationalizing good urban design to various politicians and neighbors, etc. I feel pretty good about that, and, it just becomes part of, I think, a co-housing group's job where you actually have to be prepared to educate the population to some extent. Every generation has to clean up after the last generation, and, we have so much sprawl in Sacramento, it's just unfortunate, really unfortunate, and you guys mitigated that in a real positive way. 30 units on a site that had 2 houses on it previously, I believe.
Right.
And
So it was 2 houses, but it was really 1 household that ran the whole thing.
well, renters are relevant, but now you live in a village, which is great by comparison. I mean, those 2 houses on 3 acres or so,
Right. Three and a
and
half acres. It was even more than 3 acres.
yeah, in a built up area, it was unfortunate to see that kind of density, and that is something we seriously need to mitigate. So that was one of the reasons I was looking forward to your project, and I'm happy about your project is because we finally helped others see the advantages of building a village. There's no zoning that says village. There's lots of zoning that says single family houses, lots of zoning that says multifamily. But I think there's gonna be a zoning that says village in the future because there already is in Europe. You can build a project like yours as an exception to single family houses because it brings so many environmental benefits to the table. Clustering the parking, fewer parking. So many line items are advantageous to the larger public and certainly to the environment. And if you do have to get a zoning change, I'm going to argue you better have a very savvy environmental designer there who can articulate to all the parties because your project is so much smarter than single family houses. I mean, it's
Oh, yeah.
infinitely smarter.
No
So,
comparison.
there's a lot of propaganda for single family houses, and there's actually a lot of propaganda today against them, but you just have to help people see it. And there's a lot of education that goes on.
Well, and before I lived on a third of an acre, and now I live on a tenth of an acre. So I, by a factor of 3, improved my environmental footprint.
In a big way, in so many ways. Marty, is there a reason that you chose to do intergenerational as opposed to senior co-housing?
Well, first of all, I was 20 years younger when I made that choice. So I wanted to have kids in the community. I wanted to have the variety. So that's why. And knowing what I know now, I would make the same choice today. I think there's power in an intergenerational community that as you get older, you have less energy to tackle things. And I didn't want to be in a senior community that was just aging. The reason I did this is because I have a friend through the Sacramento Vegetarian Society. He unfortunately is no longer with us, but his name was Don Knutson, and he's the one who inspired me. I was picking him up, and he lived in a community called Southside Park Co-housing. It was the first co-housing built in Sacramento. When I went in to pick him up, what I saw were all these homes facing each other, and it was a common green in between them all, and one of the homes was much bigger. And I was like, "What is this?" So when I got into the car, I said, "So tell me about where you live." I looked out your window and I saw this shared green and I saw one of the homes was bigger. He says, "Oh, it's co-housing." And I said, "Co what?" And he said, "Well, it's a compromise between privacy and community. You have all the privacy you want in your own home, but then right outside your door, you have these neighbors that you can do things with and be friends with." And he says, "I think it's a great way to live."
Yeah, I was the original architect, and we did all the schematics before we turned it over to a local architect, which was a very gratifying process. I really loved working with that group like I did with yours. I want to take this opportunity to say how important project management is. Projects live and die based on somebody shepherding it along. You shepherd it through the approvals, and Daryl Berlin shepherded it through construction. Do you want to add about how important that was and caution folks on the notion of taking shortcuts on the project management?
Well, don't.
Yeah.
It's basically, no, you have to do proper project management and you have to hire staff that is capable. Daryl did a great job. He was somebody we knew, and he knew how important it was for us, and he just kept doing all the right things. You need to get professional help, and it'll cost you, but there are too many projects that have failed without getting professional help.
Yeah, I've never known how to say that without sounding like I was just advertising.
Yeah, well, I'm advertising for you and for the other professionals. They're worth every penny that you pay them.
Thank you, because it probably is the number one reason that projects fail, is there's too many people in the group who think they can do it and don't have a good sense and walk on landmines left and right.
Yeah.
I just was working in Costa Rica with a group there, and as part of my trip down there, I went for a few tours to the jungles with a tour guide, and you got to know all the species of everything you saw, etc. And then on the 3rd day, I decided, well, I've done this with these other people. I'm just going to go on a walk through the jungle by myself. And I was in that jungle for about 10 or 15 minutes when I realized how dumb it was for me to be walking through that jungle by myself
Dangerous.
and dangerous. There were snakes that I didn't see, spiders that I didn't see, spider webs that I didn't see. And I analogize that to people who try to do co-housing on their own, frankly.
Right.
In fact, actually, finally, the New York Times wrote an article after writing 7 very positive articles about co-housing in the New York Times. They wrote an article about a project in Connecticut that entirely tanked. And that was a project that didn't feel like they needed somebody who actually knew what they were doing. And you could see it because they had photos of it just started under construction and it was a disaster. And it tanked. I don't know what happened to it. Probably some developer bought it and turned it into regular condos. But I just would like to take this opportunity to help set groups up for success. There's nothing like working with somebody who knows what they're doing. When I went to Denmark to learn just about co-housing, I'd already been there for a year learning about housing the first time, but the second time, I was only slated to be there for 6 months. But after 6 months, there were enough of our mentors who let us know, no, you're not ready, grasshopper, you're not ready. So we ended up staying another 7 months. And, I really felt like it would not be ethical for me to take money from somebody when I don't know what I'm doing. So I stayed that 13th month until I finally said to myself, I think I can do this now. I think, 13 months, 24/7, frankly. It's really nothing like knowing exactly what you're doing, especially when you're dealing with the well being of other folks.
Right.
I don't know if that showed through when we were working. Lots of workshops that we did with you guys where sit down and 4 hours later, there was just this abundance of decisions, abundance of good ideas, abundance of great discussion. And in that context, it builds a very viable group. When people don't know what they're doing, there's acrimony. When there's acrimony, it's not positive and does not build a solid group. I don't care how much land you have, how much money you have. If you don't have a good process committee, you're pretty high centered along the way. I mean, most of them get started by somebody like you, but you get your allies together. I'm trying to remember the Getting a Bill workshop, 15 hours of this is how you get a project organized.
And that takes a lot of endurance.
15 hours?
Showing up, being part of it.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, all the group members who showed up, Katie and I were tag teaming at the front of the room for 15 hours. And I know for a fact that's how most co-housing communities got started in the US and got launched, really. And then after that 15 hours, we usually end with a few conversations, in particular, getting an LLC organized.
Yeah, we had an LLC.
And that went all the way through construction, and then you transferred to an HOA.
Right. And pretty much all the people that joined us are still here. Of the households, virtually all of them are the original people.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
It's important also to visit other co-housing communities and interview them and find out what they like and what advice they'd have for other groups.
How does somebody call you up and organize a tour of your co-housing? Because there's nothing quite like visiting a co-housing. You really get a sense of it at that point.
They just call me, tell me when they wanna come, and we give them a tour, and they love it, and we have a really nice common house. It's very inviting building right in the middle of our community, which is important. Almost 4,000 square foot, has 2 guest rooms. It has a large shared dining room, a nice lounge, but we show them the community, and everybody loves it.
That's
We can count
fantastic.
on that.
That's important because I do believe the very first time I saw co-housing in Denmark, it actually took that for it to sink in. This is unusual. This is special. This is a place where people know each other, care about each other, and support each other. And it's profound at a very basic level. It's nothing less than profound. Another important thing, not to rely on lessons learned. I mean, I have had so many groups who says that group said that they had too many parking places. And I said, "How many people did you ask?" And she says, "Well, one. One group member told me we have too many parking places." Well, you have to get real data. So you ask a second person, they might have said you have too few parking places. But you have to actually go observe. Before that, you don't really know something. You know, Americans try to cut corners, find a hack, be expedient, be thoughtful. If you're thoughtful, you will happen much faster. The project that we did in Cotati, California was 3 years start to finish. And the co-housing group was thoughtful at every level. It was very anthropological how they proceeded and makes sense because they had an anthropologist in the group. And they had 2 new neighbors. Another big senior housing project, it took 5 years. And then next to that, a big 77 unit single family house subdivision, they took 7 years.
Oh,
So if you make it smart the first time, you don't have to back up.
right, definitely.
Marty, how do you feel that your co-housing community has contributed to the wider community, especially the children living there, the impact on the children?
I see the impact on the children. At this point, we have a one-year-old, and then we have some who moved in 6 years ago, and now they're 10 years old. So our kids range from one-year-old to 10 years old, and all of us love watching the kids run around.
I mean, just watching the children run around must.
Oh, watching the children is a joy. We had one couple that moved in with a 3-month babe in arms, and that babe in arms is now walking and a year and a half old, so it's a joy to watch that happen.
Can't beat that. The positive impact of your co-housing community on the children that live there, you may not be able to contrast accurately the lives they led before to the life they lead now, but you live in a village that basically is free range children versus, a box for watching TV in the suburbs. The rest of the suburbs, basically the rest of the area that surrounds you, are just nice little glorified boxes for watching a big fat TV in. And I think the children there have much more opportunities.
Oh, yeah, they're much more active, and they play with each other, which is a good thing. We have a swimming pool, which of course is a hub of activity in the summer.
Do you have a children's committee?
We don't.
No, we do. And it's great because they organize a lot of things for the kids.
Oh, that's a good idea. No, we don't have that, but the kids seem quite happy and the parents seem quite.
Do you have a pet committee?
We used to, but we don't anymore. We don't have a huge number of pets, actually. We have some. We have at least one cat that I can think of, but we have more dogs. We have probably 8 dogs is my guess.
Co-dogs, perhaps. I mean, I hang out with a couple of the dogs in my co-housing, and it's great fun because I don't have to own a dog that way.
Right. I have a dog that I walk most afternoons,
Mm.
and the dog really looks forward to it, and I do too.
And what about other activities in your community that contributes to a wider society? In other words, like where I live, because we had some opposition and we wanted to mitigate that opposition, we got very active in the community at large, volunteering at the hospital, volunteering at the local theater. It ended up becoming high profile volunteering on purpose. And that played a big role in us finally getting our vote to get it approved. Was there is there anything like that?
Well, we have one of our members who, is a professor at American River College. Her name is Kathy, and very active in the drama productions. They do typically several plays a year, and I always go to virtually every play that they have, and I organize a group to go, and I'm just proud to be associated with this nice lady. The next one that's coming up in a couple months is Oklahoma, and that's one of my all-time favorites. It's a musical, and it's a great one.
It's a wonderful play. You're gonna have a great time. So you would say supporting the local arts was one place that you can.
Right.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, it's an important thing to do. There's so many fledgling local artists, and we have art shows and lots of other things in our common house that really shows a great deal of support for the local artists, and I love it. Um, ha- Marty, I think the book you wrote is helpful. The Attitude Treasury, 101 Inspiring Quotations. Do you think that played a role in your success?
Well, publishing a book was kind of a significant thing. I thought, "Well, I did that. Maybe I could do this other thing." And we have a lot more power than we realize we do, but you just have to trust yourself and keep taking the next step.
You just said the most important thing of the podcast. As citizens, we have so much more power than we think we do. Marty, how would you say that co-housing has affected your personal life? Not so much the heartache of getting it approved, but the heart warmth of living there.
We have typically at least once a week a community meal, and I always go to those. We originally hoped we'd have more, but we do have them once a week, which is enough in my opinion.
Marty, I would suggest that your husband lives there because you live there. How does he like it?
He's not a gushy joiner, but I think he likes it. He's on the maintenance committee, and they're currently doing, perimeter inspections of all the buildings, making sure there aren't termites or bad things that are outside of the buildings. He said to me a long time ago, "I don't wanna be alone," so he's certainly not alone.
He's an avid, very accomplished gardener. Is he having an impact on the gardening there?
Yeah, because he sets a great example. We have not only our front yard and a backyard, we also have garden boxes that are typically 4 feet by 8 feet. And those of us who have garden boxes produce these amazing vegetables. The tomato crop we've gotten is just wonderful.
That's awesome. I want to say thank you, Marty.
Well, I'm glad we did it.
Yes. And if this conversation resonated with you, consider subscribing, rating the episode, and sharing it with somebody interested in living in a sustainable neighborhood where people know each other, care about each other, and support each other. And as always, you can find out more information about everything we discussed in this episode in the episode's description, along with our website, cohousingco.com, where you can find lots of books. And the most thorough book is called Cohousing Communities, and I recommend it a great deal. And sign up for our newsletter. My email is charles.durrett@cohousingco.com. And I want to give a quick thank you to our production team here at the Cohousing Company, Natachai Kongajoran Kitsuk and Melissa Turnbull. And until next time, this is Charles Durrett, and thanks for being part of the conversation.